Hello and welcome to the Next 100 Days podcast. My name is Graham Arrowsmith.
And my name's Kevin Appleby. Well, it's always nice to have a returning guest, Graham. And today's guest, David Horne, has just written and published his second book.
Yeah, it's not only his second book, but it's just told us it's number one on Amazon. David Horne, welcome back to the Next 100 Days podcast.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's lovely to be here again.
So, David, tell us what this new book's about.
So this new book is called Funded Female Founders, and it's all about something that I stumbled across 3.5 years ago. I was speaking at an event in Reading about fundraising for SMEs, and after my talk, a woman came up and asked me what sounded like a very simple question. Why does so little funding go to female founders? And I looked at her and I said, I have no idea why, but I'll find out. And I have to say that what I've found out has been life-changing. It's unbelievable. I'm sure we'll get into the stats and everything, but less than 1% of venture capital funding goes to all female teams.
That's crazy. It is crazy, but it is something, and I don't want to remind you of this, but I will anyway. It is something that we talked about on your last visit, and there is evidence of that.
Yes.
So I'm claiming 5% of your royalties because quite clearly it all came. Actually, I think your meeting with this lady predated our podcast, but such is life.
But not by much.
Not by much, in fairness, because we were very supportive of the whole idea, and I think you were just modest in the sense that you let me believe that it was a new idea to you. But I have to say that's a really stunning quality on your part. Very sadly, it just cuts me out of royalties, and Kevin as well, because Kevin was there. Yep. But nonetheless, we're delighted that you've got this new book out. Tell us what it's called again.
So it's called Funded Female Founders: How to Traverse the Uneven Playing Field and Secure Funding to Grow Your Business.
Are you making females victims here?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. No, the whole premise of the book is that right now there is a very unfair world out there. And so in part one of the book, I go and talk about what it's really like out there and share the statistics. And the latest statistics are almost unchanged from what they were 5 years ago. So in 2021, in the year that broke all records for the amount of venture capital funding pouring in both the USA and in Europe, in 2021, all female teams submitted 5% of pitch decks and got 1% of money. That is unchanged from 2017. It did go up a bit, but it's fallen back. So 5% of decks, 1% of money. Mixed gender teams, 17% of decks, 13% of money. And all male teams, 78% of decks and 86% of money. And that's Europe, including the UK, and the stats in the United States are very similar. And the stats around the world are even worse.
Isn't it? I mean, I'm no genius, but women are usually smarter than men. Why don't women just ask men to do their pitches for them?
Because I think that's the wrong thing to do. And it's interesting. This book took a long time. This book was 18 months in the researching and writing, because I was doing so much research and interviewing so many people. And the number of women that I spoke to who said they'd been at fundraising events and were doing networking, and they'd taken along a male business partner, and even though they were the founder of the company, they were completely ignored.
Oh. It's annoying. It's really, really annoying, and I'm completely in support of what you're trying to do here, because we said it last time, we'll say it again, but it's a crazy system that you're obviously. And one of the things I read about when it came to this book, I looked at some of the comments on the book, and it was very much it was almost like a step by step, but also it was practical steps that females could take to actually get the money. So can you sort of share a little bit more about your approach to the book and maybe some of those steps?
Yeah, sure. So the whole premise of this came about, as I say, I was asked this question. I started researching it. We ran an event in November of 2019 at the London Stock Exchange, and I think that was what got referred to on the last podcast.
Sure.
And then since then, we did a series of online events, and then in March of this year, we were invited back to the London Stock Exchange to run another event. This time it was a hybrid event. So we had about 120 people at the Stock Exchange. Julia Hoggett, who's the chief exec of the London Stock Exchange, came and gave the keynote address. So we've now got, the top person at the London Stock Exchange supporting us. And we had an online audience from as far west as San Francisco, where we started at the equivalent of 6 a.m., as far east and south as Queenstown on the South Island of New Zealand, where someone dialed in and was online from 2 until 6 in the morning local time, watching the event. So that was great. So we've really started to tap into a global audience, and that's fantastic. So yeah, in terms of the way the book is set out, the whole premise is based on, let's not moan about how unfair it is. Let's acknowledge that it's unfair, but let's not moan, because there's no point moaning. No. But then let's celebrate what can be done. So the first chapter looks at all of the, what it's really like out there. The second chapter is in-depth interviews with 7 female founders in 7 different industries in 4 different countries. And the idea behind that spread was to show, here's 7, and there's many more that I could do, but here's 7. And they're in different industries and they're in different countries. So don't sort of think, oh, well, it's okay in America or it's okay in the UK, but it sucks everywhere else. So the people I interviewed were in the USA, Canada, the UK, and Switzerland.
The lady from the UK is Lauren Lewis, isn't it? And she runs a company called Glassworks. Glassworks London, yeah, it's a fashion business. So what? I mean, can you remember her story? I mean, I'm putting you on the spot here. So Lauren is an American woman who started her career in investment banking and worked for a number of big global investment banks. I think the last one was Deutsche, and she was in New York and London and Hong Kong and Tokyo and doing multi-billion-dollar deals and all that, and decided that she was sick of investment banking and launched her own business.
You would expect somebody with a background like that in investment banking to certainly know how the funding system works.
She knows how the funding system at that global mega level works. She had no idea and no contacts and no networks at the micro level. And that was her real challenge. To top it all off, Lauren is African American, right? And she's lesbian, and she's female. So, she kind of had 3 different things.
The second one gave it away, really.
Sorry?
The second bit gave it away. She's lesbian, so female. It's kind of
Yes.
I'm picking here, David.
That's okay.
But she's obviously a very impressive woman.
She's a very impressive woman.
So she, given the fact that that's the person, and to your point, Kevin, I mean, at the end of the day, if she's working in big corporate, she has one particular perspective. As soon as you're working for yourself, as we all know how that different that is. Yeah. It's a different game, and so it's almost like you've read 2 books. So Lauren has the smarts to learn quickly. Yes. So can you remember anything that sort of pivot thing for her?
The pivot thing for her was when she started networking into the venture capital firms, and one of her big pieces of advice to people was get networked into the VC firms. If you're looking, and I say this, I've been saying this for ages, if you're looking for VC type funding, start building relationships with VCs any way you can. Go to networking events, meet them, talk to them before you need money, so that when the time comes that you need money, it's like when you call on any relationship.
Yeah,
it's they call it the emotional bank account. You got to make some deposits before you can take a withdrawal.
Well, that's very impressive. And we were only at chapter 2 there, but I just thought, well, given that Lauren's in London, albeit an American in London, I mean, obviously, you said that some of the other people, obviously around the world.
Yes.
And you go on to talk about that sort of chapter 2, and chapter 3's cognitive bias. Which that's what Kevin has every time he comes on this podcast, David.
Well, I have cognitive
Kevin has that
bias
as well.
towards anything in a black and white shirt.
So go on, give us an idea what that means then.
So cognitive bias is basically, it's an unconscious thing of stuff that we learned often as children, things that we were told about, things that our parents said to us, things that we observed in the world. And we kind of took those in and just accepted them. And there are a number of fascinating things. So one of the people I interviewed for this is a professor of cognitive bias at University College London. He's very scientific, very academic focused. He concentrates on bias in the medical and criminal justice sectors. But I've tried to take what he's written and kind of turn it into plain English so people can follow it.
Yeah.
And then I also did some research and interviewed a woman who's a professor at London Business School, a lady called Dr. Dana Kanza. And for her PhD work, which she did at Columbia in New York, she analyzed all of the TechCrunch startup battle pitches from 2010 until 2017 in New York City. And she found that there was no difference between the way female and male entrepreneurs pitched their business, but there was huge variation in the Q&A sessions afterwards with investors. And what she found was that 67% of male founders were asked what are called promotional questions. How are you going to grow your market share? How are you going to double your employee base to support your growth? And 66% of women were asked what are called prevention questions. How are you going to protect yourself from the competition? What are you going to do if people try to steal your staff? So one is very much growth focused, and one is very much kind of, let's just be very, very careful focused. 67% of men got positive and 66% of women negative.
So the cognitive bias that the money men have is I don't believe you because you're female.
Interestingly, she found that both female and male investors demonstrated the same bias to female and male founders in their questioning. So the women, she was expecting the female investors to ask much more positive questions to the female founders. That didn't happen.
No.
That is really interesting. I thought a big thing in the cognitive bias would be, male white investors looking for male white founders.
Very much so. Very, very much so. But it's really interesting to see the impact that has on the female thing. And one of the other fascinating pieces of research is referred to a little later in the book, but it's very relevant to the context of cognitive bias. Was a study carried out by Lego. The Lego bricks.
I used to work for them, so I know them very well.
There we go. And so they did a study on early development with children of the types of play that they did and the gender focus of the types of play. And they found that up until about the age of 2, there was no gender difference. Which is normal because, kids aren't born with bias.
No.
But that it was actually the parents. And in some cases, I think it was parents of girls are 5 times more likely to get them to play with dolls and dress up. And parents of boys are 4 times more likely to get them to play, rambunctious sporty games or programming things. It was just incredible. So it's actually the parents putting across what they would have learned, and we go back to when we were all kids and, we learned those things. And to some degree, we passed them on to our kids. To some degree, we became aware of them and said, no, I'm not going to do that. But, so to drive the kind of change we need is going to take a few generations.
I think it's fair that Lego are recognizing that is going on in society. But certainly when I worked for them in the mid-80s, unbelievably, I was their top salesman for a few years. So basically, I kind of know how to sell the product. And one of the issues at the time is we had a Lego product for girls. It's in a green box, and it was quite friendly and lots of flowers and all kinds of girly things. And the point is, it didn't really sell that well. Girls wanted, other things that the boys were buying, because there's the same number of girls as boys. Why was it such a poor seller? And I just wonder whether or not your point is absolutely spot on. That at that moment, that's when the parental bias kicks in and says, and it might not be just parental, it might be grandparental as well.
Yep.
Saying, well, this is how it's done, with a 2-year-old. He should be kicking a ball or whatever it is. Or she should be doing this. And now we've got this nonsense about God knows how many bloody genders there are. So, but the point is, but even if you just took females and males, then we intervene, don't we, David?
Yes, absolutely. And,
is it wrong to intervene?
Crazy thing about the crazy thing about conscious bias or unconscious bias is we're in the vast majority of cases we're not even aware of it happening.
That's true. But it would be a fairly natural thing of grandparents going out Christmas shopping. You'll go down the aisles in the toy shop and you look at the boy type things, you look at the girl type things, and you'll buy accordingly.
And I mean, for our parents and grandparents' generation, that kind of bias was, they might not have the females might not have liked it, but they kind of just accepted it. In the current generations, they're not accepting it, and I think it will be very interesting. You look at what's going on with Gen Z and their whole approach to work and to gender and Graham, you talked about all of these other different genders. Well, I know some people who aren't, non-binary and different types of identities.
Oh, we've had a guest on who referred to themselves as they, but basically I find it difficult. I'll be open and honest, and like I would say 99% of all humans in this country, they do too. And so, but having said that, on a one-to-one basis, you'd want to accommodate, but one-to-many, not so much. I don't like. There's an underlying theme there, but that might be part of the root of the issue. That is, I don't think it's just about gender. I cannot imagine it's just about the way in which people genderize themselves, but I can imagine it is. I am a female. I'm bringing along this deck, and you are just not taking me in the same manner as you're taking the guy before who was male. And did you conclude that there were certain things that of that relationship, of that dynamic, that you felt that's why it was happening?
I mean, I looked at a number of different studies. There were a number of studies in Harvard Business Review over the last, a couple of them were quite recent. One of them dated, I think, back to about 2014, but they did things like they had a series of founders pitch exactly the same pitch deck. Mm-hmm. Some of them were men, some of them were women, and the men were way more likely to get funded and at bigger levels of funding, even though it was exactly the same content. They also did one where they were different decks, but the people were behind a screen and all you could hear was the voice, and the males were like 7 times more likely than the female voices to get funded.
Isn't the frustration, I'm feeling the frustration just talking about this.
Yeah.
But isn't your book aimed at the wrong people? You're almost saying these people who are suffering, here's how to deal with it, as opposed to these people who are, potentially missing out on some great female businesses. They're missing out because of the things they're doing and the thought process they've got. I mean, maybe it's another book, David. Which, of course, I'll get 5%.
I think it certainly is another book. My view was, my focus is, how do I support the entrepreneurs who are doing this? I'm focused on the entrepreneurs, not on the investment community.
Yeah, I know. I get it.
Plus, if you think back to your quotes from Machiavelli, and the person who's trying to drive change is when they're faced with something that's very resistant to change, it's really, really difficult.
Yeah.
And let's be frank, people who work in venture capital, why should they change? They're making a shit ton of money.
Yeah. So going on a more positive thing, you've got females reading. They get why it's happening, or at least they understand why it's happening.
Yep.
Unfortunately, many of them will have lived experience here. You then go into the second part of your book, which is raising funding for your business. These are real practical things that people can understand and
very
do.
much so. This is a what is it and a how to.
Yeah.
So within that, I mean, the first chapter in that second part is called "Do you really want to raise money?" Because some people think they do, and then when they face with the reality of what do you mean there's somebody going to be on my board asking me questions and challenging me and possibly firing me when I don't deliver? I don't want that. Well, if that's you, then don't bother going for funding.
No.
And then I go through all the different kinds of funding. So I start with debt, because debt's different. And then I move on to equity, and I go through, bootstrapping, family and friends, crowdfunding, angel investors, venture capital, private equity, family offices, and just talk through what each of them is.
Yeah.
And then I've created, and this was some feedback I had from my first book, I've created a fictitious company called ABC Limited that is owned by Annabelle, Bryony, and Charlotte. And it was great. It was topical. So Annabelle, Bryony, and Charlotte met in a Zoom room on an online course, and they were the algorithm randomly placed them together, and they went on to build a business. And so here's a little story about, here's how they raised their family and friends money. Here's how they got their first debt funding. Then they secured an angel investor. Then they went to VC. Then they went to PE, and just kind of, trying to take the dry subject of fundraising and bring it to life with people.
They've got far too much money by the sound of it. If they've got deals with all of these people, it's proper goodies.
Exactly.
They ought to write the book.
That's a fascinating way of teaching people, is to tell a story like that.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the key things that I've learned on my writing journey over the last, I guess I've been doing various forms of writing for the last 5 or 6 years. And it's funny, because I remember when I first started writing and I was doing blogs, and I found it really hard. And my younger daughter at the time was studying English at university. And so I paid her to write blogs for me. And it was great, like because she gave me my voice.
Yeah.
So she started writing blogs, and then I kind of realized, hey, I like the way she's doing this. It's interesting. And now whenever I write something new, like an article or anything, if she's around, I'll get her to review it, because she'll make sure that I'm staying true to my voice. And there was one piece recently where I was actually referencing the Lego study, and I was going into all the statistics, and she just looked at me and she said, Dad, this is clearly written by an accountant for accountants. You've got too many numbers in here. And so I just stripped out a lot of the numbers and turned it into the story.
Kevin's having palpitations.
I get that.
He loves
completely.
numbers.
Yeah, and we've got a boot camp running at the moment in Grow CFO, all about business partnering, and it's literally about that thing. Forget all of these detailed piles of numbers. If you're going to talk numbers, just give them 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're changing, Kevin, because your life's been based on numbers.
Absolutely, but it's
usually 0 to Newcastle and about 5 to anybody else who's playing them. But what can I say? But no. Sorry, Kevin.
To us last weekend, and we could have scored 10.
Oh, all right, okay. But before we move on to the next sort of area of the book, you talked about pitching. For those female founders who are looking for money and they're thinking about their pitch, do you have a couple of things that you could share with them that might just improve the odds of them succeeding?
Yeah, no, definitely. I actually there's a whole chapter in there about it's called Ensuring You Raise Funding Successfully, but it's all about the whole pitch process. But even before the pitch process, it's about making sure you're ready when you go into the pitch. Yeah. And so I set out and I say, look, have your fundraising assets ready. And that's your business plan, your financial forecasts, and then your pitch deck. Yeah. And I get a lot of questions from people saying, how do you structure a pitch deck? How much should it be in there? Or people send me random pitch decks and like they're 87 slides. And, I think back to one of my first FDs when I was a financial controller, and he had this wonderful expression when someone did something stupid. He gave him some kind of a report or something. He said, do you actually expect me to read this?
Yeah.
And, you got to think about that in the context of a pitch deck. Because
when it comes to an investor, though, David, is there a sort of a Goldilocks length that they should be thinking about?
Well, my recommendation is 12 slides.
12 slides.
And I set out what those 12 slides are. And then I say, if you need more in your deck to explain your technology or explain something that's unique about your business, okay, 1 or 2 slides more, but not more than 15. And the vast majority of businesses can get away with those 12.
Yeah. 12. And the danger is, of course, but people, if you say you can only got 12 PowerPoint slides, then each slide's got about 500 points on it.
Well,
but presumably a thought or two per slide.
Exactly. So I mean, literally, so I say, okay, slide number 1 is a cover slide. Keep it simple. The name of the company, and say it's a fundraising pitch deck so people know what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Then the next slide is an elevator pitch in 1 or 2 sentences that you can say out loud in 30 seconds. What is it? Because in many cases, if you're doing an unsolicited submission of a pitch to a fund, there's a junior analyst in the fund whose job, who was recruited by the fund last week, and their job is to review these unsolicited pitch decks. And they're told, you've got 1 minute, and here's a checklist of 5 things. If it doesn't have it, just chuck them in the bin.
Wow.
I spoke to one medium-sized London VC last year. They received 8,000 applications for funding, and they made 16 investments.
God.
So, and I set that out in the book, and I say, here's what you got to do. Those are the numbers.
Yeah.
So here's what you got to do to get the best chance of being in that 16.
I do this with my own clients. You're minimizing the chances of loss. So effectively, you're trying to do as many of the things that are not going to get them chucked out. And so in your case, you've got those things laid out within this book. This book, I mean, you'll be charging about 500 quid for this book, won't you?
£14.99 in paperback.
£14.99.
£14.99 paperback, and I think it's $3.99 on Kindle. And it's not on Audible yet because I haven't had time to do the recording.
Oh, are you going to do the recording then?
I will do, yeah.
That's I'd get your daughter to do it. It'd be, she'll have a wonderful voice.
Oh, she does, but
she has your voice. You said it earlier.
I've always been of the view that, particularly for non-fiction books, the author should be the one who's reading it because it's their story.
Of course it is. Okay. You, in section 3 of your book, you go into something called making fundraising fair. And we're kind of going back a little bit here.
Yeah.
Is that a sort of a high-minded, come on, guys in particular, let's see more of the opportunity that female funders are offering?
It is, and the whole philosophical approach to that part of the book came about from one of the most powerful books that I read during my researching was Emmeline Pankhurst's autobiography. And she launched the Women's Political and Social Union in 1903. I mean, she'd been campaigning for women's rights for a long time, but she launched the WSPU in 1903. And it was 1928 before the Equal Franchise Act was passed. So I said, okay, it took her 25 years. A lot of marching was done. A lot of windows were broken. A lot of police officers were assaulted. A lot of women went to prison and horrible things were done to them. But it took 25 years to make that change. And so my premise was, okay, here we are today. Let's move 25 years into the future. And this was actually the hardest part of the book. I probably spent a month or so struggling with what am I going to write? And I was actually chatting with my publisher, and she said, no, you're going about this all wrong. Go out and interview a bunch more people and get their opinions. And then you crystallize all of that into the story. And so I went out and interviewed, I think, 7 more women and got their inputs and got some things that I hadn't even thought about.
For instance,
one of the pieces of feedback that came back, well, 2 of the pieces of feedback that came back, number one, and as a guy, you just don't really think about it, but number one, we need to change the world such that women don't feel afraid when they walk down the street at night.
Right. Yeah.
And number 2, the whole issue of maternity and paternity leave and, access to childcare and things like that, because I read a whole bunch of studies that were demonstrating that for people in reasonably senior jobs, it might be okay, but for the vast majority of people who are on, average or marginally above average earnings, when they go back to work, the cost of childcare is often more than their net pay.
Yeah, that's right.
And so they decide not to bother, which, I nothing wrong with that. I think it's great. I mean, my wife decided to stay home and raise our kids before she went back to work. But I think we need, as governments, as society, we need to do something that doesn't force women into that position. If they choose to, that's wonderful, but that doesn't force them.
That's it. The point is there should be choice.
Yeah. And in fact, two of the women that I interviewed had, at various stages in their lives, lived in Scandinavian countries. And, we all know that Scandinavia, it's a high tax country, but or they are high tax countries, but the social care systems are incredibly strong.
I mean, I think we're different from the Scandinavians, but I know there's a lot to admire about them.
Yep.
I completely agree that we should have women walking around wherever they want to walk around and not feeling threatened in any way. But it's a bit like, well, Jordan Peterson comes into my mind in terms of the recent conversations he's been having with the world that says, men's got to be men, because having that threat within them makes them a man, but it doesn't mean to say that they should act on that, especially with females. And I think that and actually almost females need a threatening man in some ways, or potentially threatening man, from a protection point of view. So
I'm just going to jump in here because it's really interesting and it's topical. Yesterday, I was attending an event called the Women's Business Club Annual Conference and Awards. And I actually sponsored one of the awards, the Female Founder of the Year Award.
Right.
And there I was down in Cheltenham in this lovely old manor place, in a room. And apart from a couple of guys on the service team, cleaning up the tables and things, I was the only man there. And at the end of the day, when the awards were given out, the sponsors of the awards went up on stage, and I went up on stage, and I kind of turned around and faced the audience, and I said, "Spot the odd one out," and everybody laughed. And then I said, "Look, I think it's important that you all understand why there is a bloke up here on stage," and I told the abridged version of the story in 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah. And
then after the event was over, I had a queue of about a dozen people who wanted to come and talk to me.
You're a power for good. There's no question about that. I'm delighted that you've come back on the podcast, because I think there's so much about what you're trying to do and how you're trying to help women. And it is women, isn't it? I mean, you're focused on women female funders who are got a great idea. And they just need the funding to make that a reality. It's just like a lot of other.
It's a little broader than that. The book is focused on female founders. There might be another one. The reality is, the vast majority of funding goes to white guys.
Oh, I see. So it's not. We talked about this last time. It's BAME as well, isn't it?
It's not just gender. It's also ethnicity.
Yeah, and Okay, so but you didn't. There's a nod in that direction from the graphic on the book. It's not necessarily stating that out openly, is it?
Correct.
So
correct. Yeah, because one of the women on the front cover is wearing a hijab.
Yeah, I noted that, and in fairness, the other one looks potentially. Anyway, point is it's a subtle but also a clever way of actually providing that sort of help. But if you're a male black person who is in the same pitch, you're probably going to face the same kind of issues. But are they different, do you think, for males who are not white?
Anything I responded to would be a lot less research driven. So I can broadly say yes, but I don't have the level of research conviction and statistics to back me up.
Yeah.
But I certainly know it from discussions with, with black men, with Asian men, about the challenges that they face, and they are broadly similar. Yeah. But yeah, I don't have the research behind it to say as conclusively.
We can only fight one battle at a time, and I know there's a sort of a spillover, which is really what you're pointing out here. But basically, you're actually talking about funding female founders. And I think that's the purpose. And, frankly, David, if you make a bit of an impact on this, I mean, what would be great for you as an outcome is getting a load of people sort of writing testimonials for you based on the fact that they read the book, they took action on it, and guess what? Got the funding. That would be that would make your day, wouldn't it?
That would make my day. But there's a bigger story as well, which is alluded to in the final chapter, which is that I'm currently in process of raising a fund that we intend to list on the London Stock Exchange, that will invest in female founders and non-white ethnic founders.
Wow.
I have to be careful what I say because of regulatory reasons.
Yeah.
But we are deliberately setting this up as a listed vehicle because the vast majority of the venture capital and private equity and angel and all that takes place in such an opaque, secret, behind closed doors, no communication type of thing. And I want to bring transparency to that. And also with having a listed vehicle, it gives me a wonderful opportunity to amplify the message, because I can put out press releases that go out on the regulatory news services, and they get picked up by all the news wires, and that will really amplify the message.
Wow.
As well as providing a great return for shareholders.
Well, you would hope so.
Yeah.
So, Graham, is that one for your investment portfolio?
Well, it may well be, because to be honest with you, I'm all, people turn up at my door all the time, and to help them raise money.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do a little bit of this. So I'm particularly interested in your book, and the things that you're doing. I like the fact that you're helping female founders. I really like that, because I think I'm kind of one for the underdog. I support Leeds United.
Me too, completely.
I support Leeds United, and therefore it makes me one for the underdog. So basically, but I genuinely want people. The idea of a level playing field is something that we might talk about, but it just doesn't exist sometimes. And you've got to do stuff like you're doing, and take action. I don't believe you stick your hand to a motorway and stop traffic. I don't believe in that. I really don't find that. But this is different. This is genuinely trying to help people.
Yeah.
And I suspect Emily Pankhurst might well have been sticking around to motorways. I don't know. I might be wrong. But the issue is she did make a difference.
Oh, she made a huge difference.
But in this particular case, it might be 25 years from now. We'll all be a bit older, won't we, Kevin?
We'll all be a bit older. I mean, yeah. And the great thing is I've got a team of people working with me on this stuff, so that, even when I'm gone, there are others who will carry on.
Well, you've still got hair, so you'll last forever. But
I'll pose an interesting question at the end of this. We're in a bit of political turmoil at the moment in the UK.
We are.
Would we be having such a problem if the Prime Minister was male and the Chancellor was white?
No, I don't think that has anything to do with it all. And in fact, I think the fact that that none of the four great offices of state for the first time ever is occupied by a white man is a good thing.
Yeah, I agree totally with that.
I think what's happened here is we've got a situation, and regardless of people's politics, and I don't necessarily want to get into that because that's just a black hole that nobody wants to go down. But I think what happened is, you had a situation where you had a naughty prime minister who got thrown out by his party, despite the fact that he won a huge majority. Yeah. And then you've got a parliamentary party that overwhelmingly voted to have the chancellor, an Asian male, as the leader, with Liz Truss as the runner-up. And then it went out to the wider Conservative Party, and they overwhelmingly voted for Liz Truss. So you've got, I don't know what the membership of the Tory party is. It's under 200,000, but you got 200,000 people who've just decided, here's what our country's new government's going to be. And so Liz Truss comes in, and she's full of, vim and vigor and wanting to do stuff and all that. And, Kwasi Kwarteng's an incredibly intelligent man. But they sure didn't read the mood of the country with some of their things. And, who knows what's going to happen. But no, I categorically do not think we would have been better off with, a bunch of white men in those offices of power.
Well, Kevin and I couldn't have done it. I think we could have done it. I think they should have appointed the next 100 days guests to run the country.
I think my point was that white male would not have done it any better.
Nope.
We've got two very talented people there, but the cognitive bias and so on, and the noise in the media and everywhere else, would that have been different?
Well, that's a hard one to say. And there was a spoof video going around that you may have seen. It was based off a Sky News interview, and then some comedian put her port on and purported to be a Tory MP from Westminster. And it was all about the cost of living crisis and all of this. And, she started out by saying, well, rich people are suffering with this as well. They have multiple homes, and, some of us have stables. And I mean, it was hilarious. If you haven't seen it, drop me a note afterwards and I'll forward it to you. But the reality is, what happened was, they came in and they said, yeah, we're going to protect everyone from the fuel bills crisis. And that needed to happen. But at the same time, they then said, we're freezing universal credit. We're going to eliminate the cap on bankers' bonuses. And by the way, the 45p tax rate's been abolished. So yeah, we've helped everyone a bit with the energy, but we're now going to, make the rich richer.
Yeah, we are descending into a discussion about what's right or wrong with politics. But I agree with you, because I was just going to put this cap on, because that would really upset you. That this was bought by a certain Kevin Appleby. But I know that we have to have sort of balance on this show. So this is red for the Republicans, and this is blue for the Democrats. So I was over in America a couple of weeks ago, and I went to the Kennedy Space Center. This is the only one that fit me, So, and it happened to be blue, so I couldn't have a red one. If I brought that back, being a Leeds fan. But anyway, no, it's been an absolute pleasure, David, having you on the next 100 Days podcast.
Thank you. It's been a delight to be back.
So, Graham, I think David's new book is going to be incredibly helpful. And David's not just saying why this is happening, but he's going on to give some very, very solid advice as to what you should be doing if you're a potential entrepreneur wanting to raise funds. And, I think a lot of that advice in there is going to be great for anybody in this situation. Some common sense things. Go network with the investors. Go sort things out well before you actually want to raise money. They're all going to be solid pieces of advice. And I think it's going to be a great read for anybody who wants to understand the fundraising transaction and what goes on.
I couldn't agree more. I've just pressed the button and I've bought the book. So basically, I can't wait for it to turn up, and I'll be looking at that next week. The thing that I found talking to David for the second time was I was getting really quite frustrated, because sometimes when you see people, going into bat for their businesses, and not because of the business itself, but because the person itself, whether or not you're, if it's just a straight white female person, and you can have variants of that, as David sort of indicated, BAME, etc. But them not getting a fair rub of the green, getting questions that are not given to the white male. Why have we got ourselves into that situation? And there's no doubt we are in that situation. So what should we be doing to get ourselves out of that? And will it be another 25 years? Or in another 25 years, will it just be, instead of being, low percentages, it'll be teen percentages? So progress has been made, but not that much progress. And I just think it's so disheartening. But you have to look at the positives, and he's written this brilliant book. And if you're a female founder, buy it, pore over it, and then start implementing. And because I think, you're going to be part of the success of that next 25 years. Don't stick your hand to a motorway, because frankly, you'll lose my support. But at the end of the day, I suppose that's that important to them. But the point is, if they're successful by doing the things that David's suggesting, that's the bit that's going to make the whole thing different. More success gets success, doesn't it?
It does. But, the cognitive bias that is there in the investment houses has got to change as well.
Yeah.
And I'm really pleased that David is doing something. And in many ways, Graham, I don't like things that are biased in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
The fund that David's setting up, but I really like that he's setting that fund up to level the playing field.
Yeah, it's a sort of, he's only doing what the other side are doing.
Yeah.
It's just that he's been more open about it, more transparent. And it does feel wrong, but I understand where he's going there, and he'll probably make a lot of money from it. So from that point of view, and the investors into the fund will make a lot of money from it. So yeah, it might well be something I'll consider. And as a relatively small investor in that fund. Kevin, it's been great having David on again. It's a book that we would strongly recommend. There'll be a link to it in the show notes. Today, I've been Graham Arrowsmith.
I've been Kevin Appleby. Goodbye.
Goodbye.